Every year in Geneva, as the Israeli mission, of course, we prepare for the International Day for the Prevention Against Violence Against Women. We observe every year November 25th, and in previous years, we've joined others in organizing events throughout the 16 days of activism. Sadly, this year is a very different year for us. Many things changed for us on October 7th. The brutal massacre that took place on October 7th has changed the way that Israel and many Israelis view the multilateral arena, including its response to the gender-based violence that occurred that day against Israeli women. It took several days for us in Israel to fully grasp the nature and the scale of the violence that took place on October 7th. I'm not sure that even today we fully understand the brutality and the scope. We have a better understanding, but I'm not sure we comprehend the brutality of it, especially the sexual violence against women. The testimonies and evidence that we will discuss today shook every single Israeli. Organizations like UN Women, in my eyes, I'm sure you would agree with me, exist to protect women from such crimes. The unforgettable silence of organizations like UN Women and others when faced with rape and murder of Israeli women is really inconceivable. Inconceivable not only for us who work here, but for many in Israel, in government, in civil society, women's groups that have worked with the multilateral world for years. The silence, I have to say, it's not that some of the statements were weak. We're talking about utter silence, utter silence. So today in Israel, I have to tell you that the term "Me Too, unless you're a Jew" is really trending on social media. There are many in Israel that feel this way. Me too, unless you're a Jew. It's not only a slogan, it's a real deep, I don't want to say disappointment, I have to say it's too mild for what we feel, for women and girls that are activists, that our world has totally changed on October 7th. I want to recognize also that women and girls suffer in Gaza. We understand the humanitarian toll on civilians in Gaza. It's very regrettable. It's very sad what they have to go through, civilians as a whole. But we have to direct and understand that it lies with the Hamas terrorist organization that continues to use its people, including women and children, as human shields. The event today is very important because we wanted to shed light on what we've been going through October 7th, the evidence that is starting to be collected about the sexual rape and abuse against women. It's not an easy one, but in our mind, we, as a collective, cannot be silent. We have to speak up. First of all, to recognize what happened. The First Lady of Israel wrote recently in an article in Newsweek, Michal Herzog, "We owe it not only to our victims, but to all women who face these crimes in the future and must know that they are not alone." That's what she published in Newsweek. So with that, I would like to introduce our panel today. First of all, I'm very pleased to honored to introduce Professor Ruth Halperin-Kaddari, which I've known for many, many years throughout her work at the UN and in other places. Ruth is an expert on family law and international women's rights, and is the founding director of the Rachman Center for the Advancement of the Status of Women at the Bar-Ilan University Law Faculty, where she serves as a full professor. In December 2018, she completed 3 terms on CEDAW, during which she served twice as vice chair of the committee and as the first chair of the working group on inquiries. She's a recipient of numerous international awards, including the US State Department Women of Courage Award, and in 2018, she was named on Apolitical 100 Most Influential People in Gender Policy around the world. Joining us online, I have the honor also to introduce somebody that I've read many of her writings, Professor Catharin MacKinnon. Professor MacKinnon is a feminist, legal scholar, activist, and an author. She currently teaches law at the University of Michigan Law School. She's an expert of international law, constitutional law, political and legal theory, and jurisprudence. Professor MacKinnon focuses on women's rights and sexual abuse and exploitation. For 50 years, she has worked against sexual assault, including with survivors, having created and established the legal claim for rape as genocide. From 2008 to 2012, she was the special gender advisor to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Thank you very much for joining us. I would also like to introduce 2 other speakers that will be joining us online from Israel. Superintendent Moshe Mazaki, Head of Investigation Department, 105 Unit of the Lahav 433 at the Israel Police. Before the war, he was the head of criminal investigation on cyber. But since October 7th, he and his team have been collecting testimonies from survivors and witnesses to sexual violence committed since October 7th. Also joining us online, Sheri Mendes. Sheri is an architect living in Jerusalem. She is a member of the Army Reserve Unit that was established in 2010 by the Israeli Army Rabbinate to work specifically with the identification and burial preparation of deceased female soldiers. Most of the women are volunteers with women's burial societies in their communities. The unit, based in the center of the country at Army Rabbinate headquarters on the Shura base, trained in procedures for identification and mass casualties events. So I'd like to thank all our speakers for joining us today, and Professor Halperin-Kaddari, please open the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ayalon Shachar, and thank you all for coming to this event, which I'm really feel is a very, very important one. I'll say some short opening remarks, and then I'll speak later after our panelists will have their interventions. As you all know, on October 7th, Hamas mounted a murderous attack on Israel, massacring men, women, and children, wiping out whole communities. And a major part of this murderous attack was various acts of sexual violence against women, girls, children, the amount of which were at the beginning unknown. Not only were they unknown, they were also, I would say, not overlooked, but hushed, perhaps even silenced. But we, civil society in Israel, feminist academics, myself, with the experience that I had during my 12 years on CEDAW and as a scholar, I immediately knew, once the scope of the attack became known, I immediately knew that sexual violence was part of it. And within a day or two, together with colleagues, we started approaching both the Israeli authorities as well as the international community, international human rights community, international women's organizations, asking for recognition, for acknowledgement, for a strong condemnation of this particularly horrific and unique aspect of terror, of cruelty committed by Hamas. And later on in the panel, I'll address the response, or rather the lack of response, the cold shoulder, dismissal that we received from both UN human rights bodies, other international human rights community, as well as women's organizations. As we will hear from the two first speakers, Israel is now conducting the largest and the most complex and challenging investigation in its history. And we very much hope that justice will be done to those perpetrators, monstrous perpetrators that are held in Israel. But we need the response of the world community. We need the support, the acknowledgement, the recognition of the international human rights community. This investigation is very, very difficult, particularly with respect to the issue of sexual violence. But the purpose of today's panel is to show that even at this beginning stage of the investigation, there is already abundant evidence that proves that sexual violence was a premeditated, intended part of the plan of Hamas to target women, girls, children, and to inflict the worst form of terror and fear, not only with the female victims, but towards Israeli society, Israeli community at large. And I think that with that, we will turn to the speakers, and I'll expand on that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Moshe, Superintendent Moshe.
Yes, hello. I am a Superintendent Moshe Mazaki, Head of Investigation Division in 105 Unit, which is part of Lahav 433 in the Israeli police. I would like to express my condolences to the families who have lost their loved ones, send my wishes for full recovery and good health to those who were injured. Pray for the immediate return of all the hostages and express my support to all the security forces in the war against the murderous terrorist organization Hamas ISIS. Lab 433 in the Israeli police, alongside the General Security Services and the State Authorities Office, is leading the investigation of the murderous terrorist of Hamas ISIS, who committed the terrorist action on October 7th, 2023. The horrific and monstrous terrorist action were committed against innocent civilians while they were staying in their homes, dancing at a rave party, hiking with their friends and families in the early Saturday morning, without any distinction between babies, girls and boys, teenagers, women and men, female and male soldiers, policewomen and policemen, members of the security forces. The despicable and horrendous crimes included the cold-blooded murder of over 1,000 civilians, IDF soldiers, police officers, and members of the security forces. Among them, tens of boys and girls, hundreds of women, including tens of elderly men and women. As part of the investigations, testimonies are collected from the survivors, from the families of the murdered and abducted, members of the security forces, Zaka and firefighters, rescue and medical forces. We are now at the primal stages of the investigations and have collected so far over 1,500 shocking and horrendous testimonies that the human mind and soul cannot comprehend or absorb. The murderous terrorists were not satisfied with the murder of the innocent. They went back and made sure they did not leave any victim alive, even while their victims were trying to run for their lives. They were engaged in ransacking, desecration, and mutilation of bodies, including cutting of organs and burning them. The despicable terrorists, in a planned and methodical manner, committed a massacre and mass killing while equipped with various weapons, armed with an unfathomable amount of cartridges, grenades, and missiles against innocent civilians, with no distinction between religious, race, or gender, a mass destruction of any living soul that stood in their way. During the investigation, we handle, among other things, the collection of evidence of sexual offenses committed against the victims. The investigation is conducted in cooperation with government ministries, such as the Ministry of Health and Welfare, the IDF, the Institute of Forensic Medicine, the Association of Assistance Centers of Victims of Sexual Assault, therapeutic centers, and various civil forums. The scope of the terrorist attack is incomprehensible, both in terms of numbers of the murdered and the injured, and in terms of the horror, the desecration, the mutilation of bodies, the pure evil, and the cruelty, as were well described by the witnesses themselves. And I want to talk about several witnesses. A survivor from the Nova Party in his testimony, and I quote, "Everything was an apocalypse of corpses, girls without any clothes on, without tops, without underwear, people cut in half, butchered, some were beheaded. There were girls there with broken pelvis from being raped so many times. Their legs were spread widely apart in splits." A rescue who helped rescue survivors from the party describes, and I quote, "There were bodies everywhere, hundreds of bodies, injured people. I saw a naked woman. There was a girl I remember with bullet shot in her chest." A female from the Nova Party describes, and I quote, "A tent full of corpses, with hands tied behind their backs. There was a body of a woman that was bleeding from her genital area." A male witness described, and I quote, "Many mutilated bodies in the head and neck area, heads crushed, the corpse of a woman with her jeans rolled down to her knees, heads without bodies, mostly of men, a body with a knife stuck in the jaw." Female witness described, and I quote, "There were a lot of gunshot wounds. There were shooting specifically aimed to male genitals, shooting toward the stomach area, the limbs, and the buttocks. They had things with male and female genitals. We saw mastectomies and gunshot wounds of women. In men, we saw a lot of genital amputations. A survivor from the Nova Party describes, it starts, and I quote, "It starts with some girl with short hair. I didn't see her at the party. I witnessed a situation in which she was sitting on her knees and begging. Terrorists stand over her and spit in her face. I realized that he was probably taking a picture with his cell phone, and then he shot her in the head. To the area where we were hiding, they brought all the women, even women's heads. There was even a small head of a girl, if I remember correctly. There was a situation in which they bent a girl over and one of them raped her. And then they passed her from one to the other. They were dressed as soldiers. I heard shouts in Arabic. The girl they were raping was still alive, standing on her feet. She was bleeding from the back. There was another girl. I was trying to remember what she was wearing, and I couldn't. I do remember the terrorist pulling her hair, her being undressed. He cut off her breasts and tossed it into the ground, and they play with it. They kept pulling her. I remember someone penetrating her and then shooting her in the head. He didn't pull up his pants. He shot her in the head while his pants were still down. A testimony from the rescue forces that refers to a house in one of the settlements, and I quote, "Inside the shower, there was the body of a cuffed woman. She was without any underwear. The body was in the corner and her hands were tied." Another person described, and I quote, "I saw an elderly woman naked without underwear." Another person described, and I quote, "Between the houses, we found a body in the ruins. We only saw the head and neck. The mouth was blocked with some kind of cloth. After revealing the body, we realized that the body was naked." These horrors are just tiny bunch and fragment out of the shocking and the horrible testimonies depicting the heinous crimes against the humanity. Descriptions any human being struggle to process and even fathom. As I mentioned earlier, the investigation is only just begun and at the primal stages. The investigating teams are working hard on collecting and strengthening the evidence. I deeply thank all the citizens of Israel for their cooperation, their courage, and the mental strength they have found within themselves, and this time in order to assist the Israeli police investigating the largest terror attack in our nation's history. Once again, I would like to extend my support to all the security forces in the war against the murderous terrorist organization Hamas ISIS. Am Israel Chai. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Moshe. Thank you very much for joining us. And we will go straight to Sheri Mendes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I just want to thank all of you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Sheri, and I'm an architect by profession. But since October 7th, I have a great deal of time at the Shura Army base where all of the victims of the Hamas massacre have been sent. I'd like to explain to you why I happen to be there. In 2010, a special reserve unit of the Army was created within the rabbinate in order to deal with the possibility of female soldier casualties as more combat units were opening up to women. Our unit is composed of women reservists who are tasked to be part of all of the procedures that are required after a female soldier dies. Why was this unit needed? In Jewish tradition, burial societies tend to be segregated by sex, with women tending to women and men to men. It is a gesture of respect for the deceased female soldiers and their families to know that women are present throughout the identification process and who are in charge of the burial preparation of their daughters. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do today. I'm going to tell you what I witnessed, what we witnessed at the Shura base since October 7th. I'm going to tell you what I'm not going to do. I am not going to overplay or underplay anything. I am going to just tell you what we have seen with our own eyes. Our unit trained for mass casualty events, but there was no way we could have anticipated anything like what happened on October 7th. Our main concern, especially in the first days, was identification so that families could be notified, and then preparation for burial. I arrived at the Shura base at 7 a.m. on Sunday morning, October 8th, and it was unimaginable in two ways. The first way was in scale, in numbers, in sheer numbers. When I came in on that first Sunday, body bags were already piled to the ceiling, lining the corridors, all rooms, the entry area. Refrigerated trucks were waiting outside, also completely full. Body bags just kept coming in all shapes and sizes. Many were dripping, oozing liquids, and the floors were wet. The smell of death was already unbearable, and masks were of little use. It is impossible to overemphasize the number of bodies that we were dealing with and the sense of shock and despair. We powered through, working in shifts 24/7, carefully accompanying the victims, female soldiers in our case. As they went through the identification process, teams of medical professionals, dentists, and other experts were in the identification rooms. It is a very painstaking process, identification. Bodies can only be prepared for burial once they have been 100% physically identified, so there is never any doubt for the families. Teams have been and are still working at the Shura base around the clock since the war started through heartache and exhaustion. We are a very small country, and we all feel a great deal of responsibility toward the families. The second shock was the extent of the cruelty we witnessed. We saw horrendous atrocities with our own eyes. Bodies came in body bags, and it was our job, this group of women, to open them for the identification team. We never knew what we would see, and this was a very scary moment for us. Here are some examples of the things we saw at the base. Victims were often shot many times in the body and then many more times in the head. Heads and faces were covered in blood. People were shot in the eyes, face, and skull. Almost everyone had blood dripping still from their eyes, from their ears, from their noses, even days later. It was often impossible for families to be shown faces, and it seemed as if mutilation of these women's faces was an objective in their murders. Some heads were bashed in so badly that their brains were spilling out and had to be collected for burial. Jewish law requires that body parts be rescued and buried as much as possible. Even bloody clothing is buried, and even the cloths we used to wipe away blood, we buried those too. Some were shot in the head so many times at close range that their heads were almost blown off. In some cases, this was done after death, just out of cruelty. How do we know that? Because there was no blood coming out of these wounds. The heads were already drained of blood from the first shots. These women, I want to tell you that they arrived with their eyes open, their mouths in grimaces, their hands clenched. Soldiers that we dealt with had expressions of agony on their faces, still days later, even in death. I remember one young soldier whose arm was broken in so many places that it was difficult for us to lay her arm in the burial shroud. Her leg too. In her case, the entire left side of her body was shredded, torn open, most likely by a grenade. It is customary to place a body in Jewish burial custom in a burial shroud, a pure white linen burial shroud. But in many of these cases, we had no choice but to lay a simple white linen sheet on top of them. Many young women arrived in bloody, shredded rags or just in underwear, and their underwear was often very bloody. Our team commanders saw several soldiers who were shot in the crotch, in intimate areas, in their vaginas, or they were shot in their breast. This seemed to be systematic genital mutilation of a group of victims. We saw bodies in advanced stages of decomposition, a terrible dark green color, completely covered with large live maggots. This was very traumatic for our unit. Somebody's bodies could not be recovered until many days later because their communities were still dangerous. On more than one occasion, we were told to run, get out. Now, we never wanted to leave these bodies unattended. It was our job to be with them all the time, but it was dangerous to be there. And we were told that bodies were booby-trapped, and they had to bring in special bomb squads to check the bodies. This was very dangerous for us, and it was very scary. What others on our team have seen or witnessed, I want to tell you. We have seen bodies that were beheaded or had limbs cut off, mutilated. The team right before me on my shift was warned, a woman is coming in, a woman soldier, and her legs have been cut off. She has no legs. Charred remains arrived and had to be identified and prepared for burial. I want to describe to you what I'm talking about. These remains looked like charcoal on a barbecue. These bodies were burnt beyond recognition. There were no arms, there were no legs. There was nothing that looked like a human body in these burnt remains. We could not tell if they were male or female. This was only possible to determine by DNA. We sifted through piles of ashes that disintegrated in our hands. These soldiers were burnt alive at very high temperatures. We know this because a few survivors who escaped told of hearing the terrible screams, and they bore witness to the names of who they had seen. Jews being burnt alive is a very powerful trigger for our post-Holocaust generation. Our unit also saw several severed heads, one with a large kitchen knife still stuck in the neck. These barbarians did not show these women any honor in life. At least we showed them deep love and gentleness in death. I want to tell you that when we went from the identification room to the burial room, this was a room that was just for women. We women took care of these young female soldiers. We took a little more time. It was a very, very, very difficult thing for us because these women could have been our daughters. We felt that we needed to shower them with love, even in the small time we had. We did, because we knew that we would likely be the last people who would see these poor women. It was a very important role we had. I'd like to tell you a personal story of something that broke me. When these body bags came in, I'm an architect, I deal with color, and all we saw over and over again were muted, depressing gray, dark green, dried blood, brown, and suddenly we would see a spark of color. We would see bright red or bright pink, and it was these girls, it was their beautiful manicures. And when we saw this, we are women, we understand that a manicure is something, it's a sign of hope, that you'll get off for the weekend and go home to your lover, your husband, and you'll be beautiful for them. And when we saw these beautiful manicures, we closed their eyes and we cried because all of that hope was extinguished. Finally, as a child of a Holocaust survivor, I understand the importance of bearing witness, and that is why I am repeating these unbearable stories to you on behalf of my people and my country. I am here to be the voice of those who cannot testify today, and I thank you so deeply for your time, your sensitivity, and your trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sheri, for sharing with you what you've seen. I know, and I want to thank you, first of all, for the work you did and still do. So I know it's not easy, but thank you very much. I think it was very important to hear. Professor MacKinnon, really, it's an honor to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us. I know it's very early on the West Coast, but I appreciate that you're joining us online. We wish we could have had you here with us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ruth, and thank you, Ambassador and Superintendent Moshe and Sheri Mendes, for all you've said this morning, and for, in particular, the shattering, dreadful accounts of what took place on October 7th to Israeli women. I was asked to talk about legal theory, and in particular, your thoughts today are directed toward the notion of crimes against humanity, as to which the evidence that has been recounted surely shows that, together with other evidence that has appeared in the public record. I would just like to note that there are some other legal rubrics that could well be considered in connection with October 7th, which I won't go into because they weren't what was put top of mind for today. But war crimes has some possible other international humanitarian law, some possible claims. Of course, terrorism, and I mention this because there are laws against it that can be prosecuted in various domestic settings. Actually, Israel has a law against terrorism. And also genocide, which I think deserves further consideration in connection with the evidence as it emerges, and also as it has already emerged in connection with October 7th, in specific to do with the sexual atrocities in the context of the larger abuses, but actually focusing on the sexual atrocities. And there are other international possibilities as well. But with regard to crimes against humanity, what you legally need specifically in order to prosecute them includes evidence, of which we've heard some today, a defendant or defendants, someone individually to prosecute, because criminal law runs to specific individual criminals, not to states, and also a forum, which in this case presents some real challenges. As to the evidence, what we've heard today and also what has been available internationally needs to show widespread or systematic atrocities to civilians. Depending again on the evidence, there appear to have been many, although this wasn't raised today, many different cities involved, many different kibbutzim, other various different physical locations that were simultaneously attacked. This could potentially satisfy the widespread criterion. However, the attacks were rather clearly systematic. And there's an or in between those two terms, at least at the International Criminal Court, which has the most restrictive definition. International common law can have less restrictive definitions, which could apply in third countries, for example, for prosecutions. But I'm just thinking in terms of the International Criminal Court definition, which, as I'll say a little bit about, has form problems in this instance, which I'm sure you're aware of. But these atrocities certainly were systematically carried out. And again, so far as the ICC is concerned, they were organized in the sense of being planned. There apparently has been a policy by Hamas to engage in such abuses. The commission of acts against civilians in furtherance of an organizational policy, which is an element in the International Criminal Court. And it isn't always an element in all jurisdictions where crimes against humanity are prosecuted. But there it is. But certainly that is present here. The acts of murder and extermination were documented by Superintendent Moshe and also further confirmed by Sheri Mendes's observations. The severe deprivation of physical liberty appears also to have occurred in connection with sexual atrocities, rape, and other crimes of sexual violence, other inhumane acts intentionally causing great suffering seems the most prominent rubric that was documented to us this morning. And serious injury, in this case, both the serious injuries resulting in death. There was mutilation of people's bodies after death in ways that are gender-based was documented today, and I think should be highlighted as part of the way the inhumane acts in the ways these atrocities were committed. So all those particulars are well shown or indicated in ways that apparently there are witnesses who heard or saw, who are living, who could testify, who heard or saw these atrocities, and also the evidence, the empirical forensic evidence from the physical bodies. So far as defendants are concerned, it would be necessary for members of Hamas, either who committed atrocities or who designed the policy or plan, not all of whom are in Gaza or have even been there for some time, to be present in any jurisdiction where they were to be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. And again, since I was asked to speak about legal theory, the matter of where the forum is crucial here. There are dilemmas, conflicts, issues, so far as, shall we say, Israel's recognition of the ICC as a forum. Since, I believe it was April 2021, the ICC recognized and has been engaging in investigations in Israel, Israel and in the Palestinian territories. for potential violations of the Rome Statute. And Israel's position has been that they have no jurisdiction, although the ICC has said that it does. That puts Israel in a difficult position to have crimes against humanity against Israeli women for sexual atrocities on October 7th prosecuted at the International Criminal Court, which would otherwise be the natural forum for that prosecution. It's not impossible to be overcome, but some of the issues involved clearly pose a difficult dilemma for the government. The other, I mean, being that sexual atrocities these days are rather well integrated into some of these other rubrics, but also in crimes against humanity. And there are also third countries where the conflict that I just mentioned would not be posed for the state of Israel. There are other possible forums, places where crimes against humanity are prosecuted that could conceivably be recognized, but all the jurisdictional prerequisites of those locations, you know, would have to be looked into in an extremely careful way. I would just say in closing that very often evidence of sexual atrocities in the past, in investigations, in other situations of mass horror, evidence of sexual atrocities can be overlooked when those who have been so violated are dead. Clearly, from what Sheri Mendes reported, she saw a great deal of such evidence, but it would not be unusual if more or a lot of that evidence forensically became unavailable or was less than thoroughly collected at a time of extreme trauma. I'm sure I don't need to alert the superintendent or Sheri Mendes to what is called secondary trauma, but is actually trauma that to which you and your colleagues are exposed in situations of such dreadful atrocities as you have had to witness, and as are clear from the evidence that was in front of you. I think that, you know, the only other thing I would add here is that persecution as a crime against humanity, it seems to me, is a particularly fruitful possibility for prosecution if these other hurdles, evidence apparently is not a hurdle, but it would need to be a little more specified and first person and direct. And the problem of a defendant in front of a forum was solved, and a forum was achieved. Persecution, that is, which could be thought of as a criminal form of extreme discrimination against members of a group or groups by reason of the identity of the group or the collectivity. At least most of the individuals here were being targeted for and violated in the ways documented because they were Israelis or Jews or understood as being such. This means that these sexual atrocities, as well as all the others, including those against male genitals, for instance, were committed on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, or religious grounds, which is a list of elements from the International Criminal Court, but is quite well recognized in international common law as well on crimes against humanity. So Clearly, this terrorist this pogrom really was an act of persecution of Israelis and the Jewish people, which it seems to me the term persecution could also be added to both the international political vocabulary, that by political I mean with organizations, civil society, and intergovernmental and international organizations, could be added to the needed recognition of these outrages.
Thank you very much, Professor MacKinnon, for sharing your thoughts with us and how you see it from an international legal perspective. Thank you very much. Please stay with us. And Ruth, back to you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you so much, Professor MacKinnon, for your insights and your special expertise and your role in developing this legal theory, bringing the recognition that sexual violence during conflict and using rape and using sexual violence as a tool of war is in fact a category, a very specific, significant, different category of crimes against humanity. Your contribution, of course, is invaluable, and likewise, your contribution to our struggling with what we went through on October 7th is also invaluable, and it's really highly appreciated. I want to do two things now. I want to go back to the testimonies that we heard from the superintendent and from Sheri Mendes. And I want to add a few elements to those and to allow you to see the whole picture, the broad picture together. I want to mention outcomes of certain interrogations that are being conducted with the special services, security services in Israel of Hamas terrorists who are now held by Israel. I have watched at least 3 separate ones, each one of them addressing the orders and the directives that they were given by their commanders before launching the attack. And they referred to the directives to enter Israel, to torment, to torture, to take hostage, to murder, and to rape as many Jews, as many Israelis, including women, including teenagers. In one of the statements, the terrorist uses the word to dirty them. That's what they were ordered to do. And the investigator asks for an explanation of the term, and the explanation given is to whore them, to rape them. And the terrorist was asked, does it not go against the teachings of Islam? And the answer was that there is a fatwa, a religious dispensation given by a religious authority, so that they are permitted to do all these atrocities, whatever they want to. They're permitted to do that, even though it goes against the Islamic teachings. So I ask you to bear this in mind and to recall the testimonies that we heard from Superintendent Moshe and from Sheri Mendes. And add to that what I have also seen as parts of the investigation, footage and photographs of bodies taken from several locations. As Professor MacKinnon stressed, it is important to be aware of the fact that this happened simultaneously in different locations at the same time. Footage of bodies of women, all either naked or stripped from the waist to the bottom, with legs spread, with blood. One of the investigators used the term, the bodies talk, the bodies shout. So even though at the moment we do not have living survivors of the sexual violence, we have other survivors, as we heard from Moshe, the eyewitness, the survivor who eyewitnessed the gang rape of her friend. There are currently no living survivors who would step forward. As far as I know, there are some, but as we understood, most of them were immediately murdered after being raped. But I go back to those photographs, to that footage. The bodies that were found speak volumes as to what happened before they were shot, before they were killed. So we have the testimonies, the statements of the terrorists about the orders that they were given and the permission that they were given. We have the eyewitness testimonies. We have more testimonies of first respondents who had either seen those bodies, or one of the conversations that I had was with a first respondent, a paramedic, who happened to be in the south of Israel on October 7th. Immediately upon hearing that there is a terrorist attack, he drove down and joined his unit and started giving first aid to survivors. The very first patient that was brought to his ambulance was a woman from the Nova Music Festival with only her underwear on, heavily bleeding from the vagina, and all her vital signs were exactly those that match a person who had just been wounded by a shotgun, but she was not shot. He examined her and he found no shotgun. And when she managed to speak, she said that she was raped by 4 men. And the result was life-risking situation of so heavily bleeding. He doesn't know. I asked him, he doesn't know if she survived. So take all these together and recall that we are talking about different locations. And alongside the evidence that was provided by those terrorists who were captured, is clear that it was a plan. So many cases concentrated in one day of the attack. Ask you to recall that all this happened within a span of one day. Thank goodness IDF came and managed to overcome the terrorists. So they did not have 100 days like in Rwanda, or like, unfortunately, what is still going on in Ukraine. They had less than one day, but even within that relatively short span of time, it is clear that this was part of a planned policy. There's no doubt that there was a premeditated plan to murder, torture, capture civilians, including children and the elderly. And the plan included those specific instructions to weaponize women and to use their bodies as a method of causing fear and terror amongst the civilian population. All the sexual assaults were not an isolated incident. They all carried the same method of rape and subsequent murder and mutilation, and the same degree of extreme cruelty. All this was part of a wide-scale, systematic, and intentional attack, and therefore, it constitutes crimes against humanity. In light of the Hamas charter, it is clear that this was also part of the intention to destroy the national group of Israelis, as also referred to by Professor MacKinnon, and as such, it may have mounted to genocide. I'd like to go back now to the attempts that myself and my colleagues engaged in turning to the international human rights community and to the responses that we received. One by one, we either got no response to those emails that we started sending immediately within a day or two after October 7th, or the responses came in the form of statements. Statements issued by CRC, by CRPD, several statements and tweets by UN Women, a statement by CEDAW, several statements by some special rapporteurs. None of them mentioned the sexual violence that, as we understand, and as we reported to them in the very early days, we reported on all the information that we already had. None of them referred to sexual violence against women. They hardly mentioned the term of crime against humanity, and very few of them called for the immediate release of the hostages. And this is to our great dismay and disbelief. All these human rights bodies overwhelmingly declined to condemn Hamas, to ignore all those sexual crimes. And they immediately resorted to the conventional way of balancing between Israel and the Palestinians, putting it on the same par. And I want to stress that I do not deny for a moment the suffering of innocent women and children in Gaza. I'm just as concerned with the loss of life in Gaza, including the number of women and children who are victims of this armed conflict and who are also victims of Hamas. But at the same time, it cannot be denied that the abuse and sexual violence of women, as well as the continuing holding of hostages, constitute crimes against humanity, and using rape as a weapon of war is a category in itself, and it should be recognized as such. I'm hopeful that there are some signs of change in the recent days when Director of UN Women, Sima Bauhaus, reported on her meeting with Israeli NGOs and expressed concern of the sexual violence report that they gave her. And also, upon hearing from the head of the Geneva office of UN Women, acknowledgement of the sexual violence of October 7, putting it in one line with Ukraine, Sudan, the DRC, and other places. I do hope that this signals some change, because by turning a blind eye to the October 7th massacre and to the unprecedented and premeditated extreme cruelty of the sexual violence, these bodies not only fail us, but they undermine the very purpose for which they were established. And in fact, they undermine the whole international human rights system. Moreover, they are complicit in the campaign of denial launched by Hamas and its allies, and they give ammunition to those who dare claim that the October 7th massacre never happened. For the women, children, and babies who are currently held hostage, the refusal of these human rights bodies to take a stand is a betrayal of their prime duty to respect, protect, and promote the human rights of all human beings. The silence of international human rights and women's rights community is deafening. For those of us who believed in the power of international human rights institutions and in solidarity between women, it is a particularly devastating blow. The betrayal is not only to the hostages and to the victims of sexual abuse, but to the very integrity of these institutions and to the international human rights framework at large. My hope is that this event today will be a sign of a beginning of a change of this attitude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think everybody heard you here very loud and clear. What is the message? We still have some time. I wanted to open it. We don't have with us Superintendent Moshe and Sheri, but we have with us Professor MacKinnon, of course, and Ruth and Professor Halperin-Kaddari. So if there are any questions, yes, Professor MacKinnon, sorry, I see you wanted to say something. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd just like to offer a couple of further observations from Professor Ruth Halperin's extremely well framed and useful comments. I think it needs to, of course, be recognized that any possible crimes that are committed by a perpetrator government don't negate crimes by others against citizens of that government. People are apparently, am I unmuted? Let's see here. I think I'm unmuted. Okay. So that would be one thing. And secondly, while I think it's crucial, never to underestimate anti-Semitism in encountering it in the world, I would just observe that the international human rights community, how many years did it take to recognize the atrocities against Bosnian women? 2 maybe years, something like that. Hopefully one would think that having gone through that once and then recognizing them in Rwanda a little more rapidly, that more response would have been encountered in this circumstance. But I would just point out that without any direct survivors speaking and all the evidence being from second observers, not even direct witnesses, you have a particular problem, I think, to overcome. I don't think it's a valid one, but it's worth considering. And I would just also note that the denial that you've encountered in part can be attributed to the mass total cultural desensitization to sexual violence that has been perpetrated on the world by the combination of the pornography industry with the way prostitution is generally regarded. In other words, what is basically sexual atrocities are largely defended and promoted and sold as sex. And the minute you get into it, you're into boys will be boys territory, although actually some boys do grow up to be men and don't do that anymore. But in dealing with what you're calling the international community, you're dealing with that kind of world, the world that pornography and prostitution have made. And it is much worse. It has proceeded forward as purported awareness and legal recognition of the atrocities of sexual violence in conflict has also proceeded forward. So, in being appalled at the silence in response, I think there are a number of factors that make it while totally unjustifiable, at least a little bit more understandable, and call for persistence, determination, continuing to particularly focus in this instance on speaking for dead women, which we did a lot in connection with the Bosnian conflict. But I think appears to be an even more central aspect to what is being encountered here. Yeah, let's focus on what it's going to take to speak for women who are no longer alive right now, so far as the sexual atrocities that were committed against them. This is perhaps although not an absolutely new challenge, it is more central, more focused, more key to what the evidence says to us here.
Just to say thank you very much, Mirav, and thank you to this really excellent panel for helping to raise some greater awareness and making sure that we are provided important information about these horrific events on October 7th, but also putting their meaning in a sort of a broader context. I just wondered, and this may be a question for you, but if you have, in approaching any of these international organizations that have so far not acquitted themselves highly in terms of speaking out on these issues or really taking them up, what the response has been. I mean, because you have talked about some statements have been put out and some tweets have been put out, but I wonder if in conversation there's any explanation for what Mirav described at the outset as unforgettable silence.
I regret that none of these bodies suggested approaching or engaging in conversation. The beginning, as I already indicated, was just last week, which is 6 weeks after the fact, when the director of UN Women in New York agreed to meet with a number of women's organizations. And then she tweeted expressing concern on the reports that she heard about sexual violence. But I'll give you just one example. I think that really exemplifies probably the most blatant dismissal of Sima Bauhaus speaking on October 25th, which was the commemoration of the adoption, 23 years of the adoption of the historical Security Council Resolution 1325, which was the first time that the United Nations actually acknowledged the specific vulnerability of women and addressed the conflict-related sexual violence as a category in itself, et cetera, forming the framework of women, peace, and security. So I expected that the head of the UN Women, the most important organization within international human rights community, purportedly protecting all women, specifically from violence, specifically during armed conflict, I expected that she would address this occurrence that took place on October 7th, the most recent devastating reflection of what this resolution came to prevent. And there was no mention at all. And it is just an example of what I described before as the silence and the dismissal turning the other way. I think that it is a terrible message. Terrible, as I said, the silence is deafening, but actually it speaks volume as to the message that it sends to people worldwide, that these crimes can be committed and they simply will undergo unacknowledged, unrecognized, perhaps they can be committed again and again, unaccounted for.
Thank you. Thank you for, what was truly harrowing testimony. And I can only imagine how difficult it is to speak of those things that people have seen and heard and read, but particularly to have seen and to experienced. So thank you for coming to us today to tell this story, which in itself is so important, to remember what happened, to honor the victims and the survivors, but also thank you, both you, but also Professor MacKinnon, for kind of also putting that within the broader context and the broader struggle. And it's very depressing, isn't it, basically? The event's not only depressing, but the reaction to them is depressing. Having sat, Professor MacKinnon mentioned Bosnia, and as you did, having sat in the Security Council back at the time of Srebrenica, well, we haven't learned. It's very sad. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Professor MacKinnon. Thank you, Professor Ruth Halperin-Kaddari, for coming from Israel. This issue, we will continue to work on it to make sure that more and more people acknowledge and recognize what happened. It's hard for me to say that we actually have to advocate. It should be automatic that people actually recognize the atrocities that happen, not that we need to convince anyone. And that's what's mind-boggling, I have to say. And I have to tell you, it's mind-boggling to the citizens of Israel. When I spoke about the campaign before, it's really a sense of betrayal, really a sense of betrayal. That in a time where women are to be believed about what they say, no, here there is no recognition and no acknowledgement. And if there is, nobody speaks about it other than us. So that's why we wanted to share with you. And I know it wasn't an easy thing to listen to. So thank you for staying with us and coming to hear and recognize what happened. Thank you very much.